I invite the member for Kelowna Lake Country to lead the House in prayer or reflection.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. As Canadians and British Columbians, we give thanks to God for the precious gifts of freedom and peace which we enjoy. As members of the Legislative Assembly, we rededicate ourselves to the values and traditions of parliamentary democracy as a means of serving our province and our country. Amen.
Introductions by members. Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. I'm pleased to acknowledge members of the Armenian Canadian community in BC who are joining us virtually this morning. This year marks, April 24th, marks the 106th anniversary of the beginning of the Armenian genocide, an event that obviously affected every member of the Armenian Canadian community, but profoundly affected the world in the 20th century. On April 24th, 1915, 2,400 Armenian community leaders and intellectuals were rounded up in what was then the Ottoman Empire, rounded up and killed. In the 8 years that followed, 1.5 million Armenians were killed because of who they were, an event that was made worse, if that seems possible, by decades of denial by the Ottoman and successive governments that the genocide had even occurred. In April 2006, members on both sides of the House unanimously passed a motion recognizing the Armenian genocide as a crime against humanity and designating April 24th as a day of remembrance. The Armenian community has joined other groups to promote understanding of the Armenian genocide and to educate the community on the ongoing need to oppose crimes against humanity everywhere. A crime against humanity that occurs on our planet is a crime against humanity against all of us, and we must take action. And the Armenian community, amidst ongoing grief, has been a leader around the world in doing just that, and I'm so honored that they're with us today. Tomorrow, I will be joined by the Leader of the Opposition and other members of the House with the Armenian community for a virtual event to commemorate the Armenian genocide. This year, especially in light of events in Armenia and in Artsakh, it is important to show our solidarity with the Armenian people. I welcome everyone to join us tomorrow at 4:30.
Member for Richmond South Centre.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to take a moment and ask the House to help me celebrate a belated birthday for one of my constituent assistants. For us to be MLA, to be able to serve in this House, we definitely need a staff to represent us, to serve our constituents, to represent our government and our interests, to help supporting our population. So please join me and wish David Yan, my constituent assistant, a belated happy birthday. Thank you.
Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to wish happy birthday to my Executive Assistant, Jasmeet Sangha. I have worked with my staff since 2005, and I'll tell you, she comes to work every day full of energy, full of advice, and she gives everything she has in order to make me look good. And she does a really good job in the community, helping those who have issues with our ministry. So I say, Jasmeet, it's her birthday is tomorrow, so early. I say happy birthday, enjoy the day tomorrow, and you can actually take a day off tomorrow.
Madam Clerk.
Introduction of bills.
Member for Kamloops South Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the bill entitled the Split Assessment Classification Amendment Act 2021, of which notice has been given in my name on the order paper, be introduced and read a first time now. I'm pleased to introduce this bill today for the fourth time. While businesses are struggling to stay alive amid the third wave of the pandemic, they are also being hit hard with dramatically increasing property taxes on the airspace over their heads. Adding insult to injury, this is the last straw for many small businesses as they make the painful decision to lay off employees and close their doors permanently. Mom and pop cafes, restaurants and retailers in communities such as Vancouver, Surrey, Coquitlam, to name a few, are disappearing, changing our neighborhoods forever. A number of years ago, a working group including Vancouver, Burnaby, North Van, Richmond, Surrey, West Van and Coquitlam, among others, came up with a solution to this problem. These local governments are supported by a broad coalition of stakeholders, including arts, culture, neighbourhood and small business organizations, as well as the UBCM and BC Chamber. The solution proposed includes two parts: the creation of a new commercial property subclass for the airspace above small businesses and other affected organizations, and two, maximum flexibility for local governments to set the property tax rate on this new subclass as they see fit, from $0 to just below the existing commercial property tax rate. This bill provides for the exact solution that local governments and small business organizations have asked for. an optional tool that they can choose to use or not at a rate that they determine makes the most sense for each unique situation they're trying to address. It will also eliminate the nonsensical application of the speculation tax on the airspace over the heads of the same struggling small businesses. And unlike the government's interim permissive tax exemption tool that 1 year since implementation has not been used by a single one of the 162 municipalities in BC, we urge the government to call our bill for debate so a lifeline can be thrown to small businesses hit hard with skyrocketing property taxes now.
Members, the question is first reading of the bill. Those who are participating remotely, have your voting cards ready. Those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose indicate nay. Motion carried. Member.
I move that the bill be placed on the orders of the day for second reading at the next sitting of the House after today.
Members, you heard the motion. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose indicate nay. Motion carried. Madam Clerk.
Statements by members.
Member for West Vancouver, Capilano.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'm honored to address the House today on Earth Day 2021 to speak about a group doing great work in my riding of West Vancouver, Capilano, although the work that they do extends far beyond the borders of our riding. The West Vancouver Streamkeepers Society is a voluntary-based organization with its members actively engaged in streamkeeping projects to work on programs in the 22 creeks and tributaries in the district of West Vancouver. The Society manages a fish hatchery producing approximately 180,000 coho and chum fry each year, which they then stock in the local streams. Streamkeepers targets the community at large with a broad range of engagement and education programs. Their goal is to raise awareness of the importance of local creeks for salmon spawning and rearing and of the hazards that threaten those creeks. A couple or several programs that they do, they've got an Adopt a Fish program, Community Day, and many of you may have heard of our Coho Festival, which attracts people from across the Lower Mainland. These events are all designed to raise awareness of the sensitivity of our streams and fish stocks, as well as to encourage active participation and conservation through education. The Society manages the Nelson Creek Hatchery, assembles a large team for fry releases. And just to clarify, these aren't the kinds of fries that you have beside your burger. When salmon have developed to the point when they can feed themselves, they're called fry. Another undertaking or undertakings are the monitoring and gathering of data on the number of returning adult salmon and surveys on spawning salmon and emerging fry. This information is imperative for us to understand how to keep our creeks healthy and safe. As well as to being a traditional food source, Pacific salmon plays an important role in providing nutrients to our forests. I'd like to extend my appreciation to Mike Perley, Keith Peltier, and John Baker, to the 250 Society members and hundreds of volunteers. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Burnaby North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Community Savings Credit Union has been serving working people in British Columbia since 1944. And there's a branch in Burnaby North on Hastings Street. It was created by members of the IWA, and its founding mission was, and I quote, to serve those neglected by big banks. The New Westminster Credit Union, as it was known then, lent my father-in-law the $400 he needed to buy the lot in Coquitlam on which he built the family home. In 1978, it took over the Federal Civil Servants Credit Union, where my father banked in Ontario. And it's where I opened an account when I moved to BC. Today, Community Savings continues to lead the way in ensuring that the BC economy works for working people. For example, concerned about the looming skills gap, Community Savings conducted a study about community benefits agreements. It was able to confirm that CBAs are an effective way to upskill the underrepresented workforce. Groups such as women, Indigenous people, youth, and local residents already account for 46% of employment so far at CBA sites. Community Savings launched the 701 movement last summer to ask those who banged pots for our healthcare workers at 7 p.m. to sign a petition at 701 to support fair and equal pay for all healthcare workers. It was the first financial institution to offer an interest-free emergency line of credit to laid-off workers. Months before the federal pandemic stimulus packages were initiated, it also set a standard by providing paid leave to its own staff if they need to self-isolate or get their COVID-19 vaccines. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank them for all they've done to support generations of working families, as well as the ones they will be supporting in the future. Thank you.
Member for Peace River South.
Well, thank you. We can all remember that one teacher who made an impact in our lives, the one that inspired us to reach for our goals or maybe think outside the box while we're reaching for the stars. We're lucky to have one of those teachers at Tumbler Ridge Secondary School, Mark Deely. Every year, Mark gets creative and looks for ways to inspire his students by bringing unique hands-on programs into the classroom. For the last few years, Mark started up a fish farm in the school, using large tanks and assigning different duties to every student, from feeding to cleaning, to testing the water, to changing the water, to investigating why a fish might have died, to monitoring the growth progress for other fish. The main lesson was every student had a job, but if one person neglected that job, hundreds of fish would die, and you would let your class down. This year, the idea came to try something a little bit different, with the idea of working together, continuing for classroom success. Mark and his students have created their own broadcasting show, a radio show similar to the ones that we've seen in the 40s and the 50s, and they've named it A Little Bit Extra. Again, in order to be successful, everyone has a job, from being an interviewer, to being the setup tech, the recorder, to the mixer, to sound effects, to producing. This creates positive peer pressure and absolute teamwork to be successful. Last week, I was lucky enough to be interviewed by for one of their radio shows. And what I saw was students are now learning about things that they never thought that they would be a part of, an opportunity to show students a variety of what's possible. I want to thank those students, Destiny, Taylor, Vincent, Kira, Nick, Brady, Zaina, and Kakoa, for welcoming me to their classroom last week and for the chance to be interviewed. And a special thanks to their amazing teacher, Mark, a teacher that students will always remember. Thank you.
Member for Richmond South Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May 1st is the National Physician Day in Canada. More than ever, we are reminded of the dedication, sacrifice, and contributions of the physicians and all healthcare professionals who are fighting the COVID-19 pandemic and supporting the largest vaccine rollout in BC history alongside our government and the public. This pandemic has been a stark reminder of the dangers and uncertainties physicians and healthcare professionals place themselves in to perform the professional skill and care for our neighbors, our friends, and our loved ones. Thanks to our robust healthcare system in BC, we often walk into a physician's office, receive top-notch services without a second thought. For example, on a weekly basis, I go visit my family doctor, whom I consider as just a general practitioner, to get my allergy shots. However, thanks to my conversation with Dr. Matthew Chow, President of Doctors of BC, I developed a deeper appreciation of family doctors. As technology improves in the medical field, physicians and healthcare professionals are also forced to keep up and adapt to all the new challenges and advancements. Due to the ever-increased complexity and expanding protocols and advancing knowledge that family doctors must keep up with, we should no longer consider them just as general practitioners. Instead, let us all acknowledge that family doctors today are primary care specialists. Let us, as recipients of the great care and commitment, continue to modernize our healthcare system and express our appreciation and gratitude for our physicians and their healthcare professionals. Finally, I hope that all my colleagues in this House can find their own unique ways to say thank you to our physicians and healthcare professionals on May 1st, National Physicians' Day in Canada. I know I will express my sincere gratitude to my primary care specialist at my appointments this Friday. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Where do we find identity, meaning and purpose, a sense of autonomy, pride and utility? The answer, according to British writer and philosopher George Monbiot, is in volunteering. Monbiot came to this conclusion after spending time observing Britain's National Health Service. He found that there are two national health systems, as he puts it, the official one, performing daily miracles, and the voluntary network that supports it. I'm sure many of you will recognize the same structure in your own communities as I can in mine. We have two social support networks, the official one performing daily miracles and the volunteer network that supports it. I can recall no other year when volunteers rose to the enormous and risky challenge of providing services to our community last year. Within minutes of the province imposing restrictions to mitigate COVID, the volunteer Cowichan networks went to work. They partnered with service providers to create task force that organized food hamper delivery, elder care, and housing for the most vulnerable, among countless other acts of kindness that kept our community members safe, connected, and well. Volunteers are quiet heroes who put service above self, and they contribute enormously to all of our communities, yet our economic framework doesn't measure the positive value that unpaid work has on society. However, when we apply genuine progress indicators where social and environmental impacts are included in measuring economic success, volunteerism is recognized and valued as an essential component, improving the quality of life for the community as a whole and the individual volunteer. Monbiot suggests we turn on its head the idea that work defines us and volunteering is something we do on the side. He says, I would love to hear people reply when they ask what they do. I volunteer for the food bank. In my time off, I work for money. The volunteers in Cowichan inspire me to want to see their work valued and recognized as essential. All of our lives are made better for it.
Member for Nelson Creston.
Thank you, Speaker. Today is Earth Day. The theme this year for Earth Day is Restore Our Earth. I find this call to action both necessary and hopeful. According to scientists, we're currently in the 6th mass extinction. Wildlife is dying due to habitat destruction and climate change. We also know that COVID-19, which has caused the global pandemic, jumped into the human population via the wildlife trade. We know that environmental destruction has serious economic and social consequences. But ultimately, the cause of all of these factors is overconsumption, especially by the wealthy. That is us. We are the problem, not as individuals, but as a collective. That is why it is critically important that we work aggressively to reduce our GHG emissions while we work on adaptation efforts. The time is now, not tomorrow, not next year or next decade. The time is now. I'm hearing this clearly from scientists and from young people who are desperately worried about their future. But despite all of that, I have hope. And I draw my hope from the young people of this province that are standing up and demanding ambitious action on climate change. We have seen groups like Friday for Futures, who held the largest rally I have ever seen in my life in Nelson. We also have the Youth Climate Corps that are working on wildfire risk reduction, food security, and riparian restoration. We used to talk about sustainability. We cannot just sustain what we currently have. We need to regenerate. Regenerative farming, regenerative forestry. We need to regenerate our fish stocks as we phase out fossil fuels. Recycling or saying no to plastic straws is not going to cut it. We need each sector to achieve their GHG emission reduction targets as we phase out fossil fuels. With Clean BC, we have the most ambitious climate action plan in North America, and it is going to take all of us, across every ministry, in every business, and every NGO to ensure we are ambitiously working to make the changes we need to make on climate action in this province. We must do this work. We owe it to today's youth and for the generations to come. Thank you, Speaker, and happy Earth Day.
I recognize the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy to make a ministerial statement.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. Today, we join with people across British Columbia and around the world to celebrate Earth Day 2021. While this year's celebrations reflect the requirement that we all have to stay apart due to COVID-19, today is a day to recommit to the work ahead, tackling the threats of climate change, and unlocking the twin benefits of cleaner communities and clean energy economies that will determine the future of our planet. As world leaders commit to further action on climate change, we in British Columbia remain more committed than ever to protecting and enhancing our environment and building a cleaner, better future for everyone. This past year has seen remarkable changes in the clean economy, despite the global pandemic. Major automakers have increased their commitments to produce electric vehicles, pledging to phase out fossil fuel cars. Global investors are moving trillions of dollars to build a net zero economy, and more than 110 countries have already pledged to meet net zero emissions. In BC, our government continues our significant investments in our Clean BC plan to build a cleaner, stronger economic recovery and reach net zero emissions by 2050. We're expanding clean transportation options that are affordable and convenient. We're helping people, businesses, and communities build energy-efficient homes, buildings, and schools. And we're working with BC industry and clean tech companies to reduce emissions, support good jobs, and build on our advantages for the clean economy of the future. COVID-19 has highlighted just how interconnected we all are, both within and beyond our borders. It has also shown how much can be accomplished when we work together to achieve a common purpose. These are important lessons in our work to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and build a better future for our kids and our grandkids. Climate change knows no borders. By working together, we can help make sure we're ready for the enormous opportunities ahead as the world makes the necessary transition to a cleaner economy that supports the biodiversity and healthy ecosystems we need to survive and to thrive. Happy Earth Day 2021.
Member for Skeena.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As official opposition critic for environment and climate change strategy, I rise today to commemorate the 51st annual celebration of Earth Day, an opportunity to celebrate the natural beauty of the wonders of this great planet, and a chance to reaffirm our commitment to protecting that for future generations to cherish and enjoy. That commitment is something that all parties in this House uphold. Today, billions of people, 193 countries around the world now participate in Earth Day in activities all shared by everybody. Recognizing the collective responsibility we all have to this planet, our shared heritage and bond to the pale blue dot that we call Earth. In 2009, April 22nd was also proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly as International Mother Earth Day. And after a year of people all around the world staying home, not traveling, those of us who call British Columbia home have more reasons than ever to be thankful to Mother Earth and to live in this great province, one of the most beautiful places on Earth. We all recognize the importance of combating climate change, reducing emissions, and working to secure a clean future for our children and grandchildren. As the MLA for Skeena, representing one of the most stunning areas of the planet, my constituents and I care deeply for the environment. And as former chief counsellor of the Haida people, my people have a deep reverence for the natural world. We know what it means to be stewards of the land in the 21st century and how to work towards balancing economic development with environmental protection. We are practical and know that progress isn't measured in terms of months when it comes to humanity's relationship with nature. Progress takes time, but stewardship is a lifelong commitment. Taking care of the land we call home is our collective responsibility, no matter your race, religion, gender, or ethnicity. We can practice environmentally friendly habits not just today, but every day. Even small acts of conservation can add up to big impacts over time. And support initiatives to reduce emissions, including supporting and encouraging innovation and research into lessening our carbon footprint. Together, we can make a difference. Many of us on both sides of the House started in local government because we want to make a difference and find common solutions to make life better for everyone. And I believe, in spite of the past year that we've all experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic, and perhaps even because of it, we've grown to appreciate and what really matters and how vital it is we find those common solutions at the international level as well as the local level. Since 2004, I've come to see the sincerity and good work that BC has done to mitigate and remediate our impacts to our lands. And we should be sharing our best practices with the world and vice versa to make progress on a worldwide scale. Step by step to continue to protect our environment for the future while achieving prosperity for all. That should be the goal we all seek. To be united to safeguard this planet for the next generation and to bring prosperity to our loved ones and neighbors who call this planet home. This is the fight that I joined in on 2003 as an elected councillor in Kitimat Village, and I'm proud to be able to continue that fight every single day in this House. And I know British Columbians will, as they have in the past, rise up to this fight again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and happy Earth Day, BC.
Member for Saanich North and Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today on Earth Day, national governments are meeting to announce new climate targets. They acknowledge that a certain amount of global warming is already locked in. This is already having devastating effects, especially for less wealthy nations experiencing increased events like flooding, droughts, and storms. Here in Canada, we're warming at twice the natural average. But we have already had climate targets for decades. Canada remains the only G7 nation that has increased emissions since signing the Paris Climate Agreement, largely because of our continued expansion of the fossil fuel sector. Here in BC, our emissions are growing as well. This is simply incompatible with halting global warming and the devastating impacts that go along with it. We need to seize the moment to build a clean economy and embrace a just transition that takes care of every community. Today, we join people around the world in recognizing this amazing planet we call home, which gives us everything we need. As I reflect on the importance of this day to focus our attention on the global effort, I return back closer to home, to the Husseinich teachings about how we relate to each other, how we relate to our planet, and to all other species that live here, big and small. Last week, I shared a core Husseinich teaching describing the responsibility that we have to look after each other. I have in the past and will continue to in the future demand that we do better, that we cannot take refuge in rhetoric, Mr. Speaker. What's missing here is action. As my ancestors well knew, everything here on Earth is interconnected, creating a beautifully diverse web of life. It's that biodiversity that this government promised with their words to protect in legislation. Now, silence. So what will future generations say about their ancestors? As we celebrate Earth Day, let's remember that the people elected to sit in this chamber, the policymakers, the decision makers, the lawmakers who make the decisions, will shape our future. We must, with urgency, make better decisions that preserve our natural ecosystems. Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Oral questions by members.
Official House Leader, Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Premier has completely failed to explain the basic elements of his travel ban since his botched announcement on Monday. Yesterday, 11 legal and First Nations groups wrote to express their outrage. Groups like the BC Civil Liberties Association, Union of BC Indian Chiefs, BC First Nations Justice Council, British Columbia Assembly of First Nations, First Nations Summit Society, and the Pivot Legal Society, to name a few. And I quote from the letter, "The lack of information and details about the order has raised many alarm bells, especially in the middle of a global and local reckoning about systemic racism in policing and policing powers," end quote. Can the Premier explain exactly what he announced 4 days ago, or does the Premier still not know?
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the member. As the member knows, there is a pandemic going on, and one of the issues around the transmission of the virus has been travel. What was indicated on Monday is that we would be needing to bring in travel restrictions. We have made it clear that there would be information coming out later this week, which will be tomorrow. The opposition has already been informed that they will be being briefed on the proposed changes that are taking place. We are very mindful of the issues that have been raised in that letter and by others, and I note that many of those concerns have been raised at earlier points in the pandemic when government has had to put in place health orders. We will be doing everything that we need to do to ensure that not only are those concerns addressed, but we've already made it clear that there will be, and I note that the opposition, when the measure of the need for travel restrictions came out, automatically jumped the gun and said, oh, they're going to be preventing people from going about their business, going to work, which nothing could be further from the truth. But as I've said, Honourable Speaker, we will have more details coming out on Friday, and that the opposition has already been scheduled for a fulsome briefing on the issues involved.
Opposition House Leader on supplemental.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The letter points out exactly what the concerns of many in the province have been expressing this week, including many constituents to our office, because an announcement on Monday about measures that will take effect on Friday, but no information till Friday, leads to confusion. So again, this letter from the 11 legal societies as well as First Nations groups points out that announcing orders to regulate the movement of people should have the consent of First Nations. But once again, this Premier has completely ignored UNDRIP. This is what the letter from those 11 groups has to say, and I quote, "It is concerning to us that the government would make two public announcements in such a vague way with no accompanying details. And the comments of the Premier and the Solicitor General are different from one another, which adds to the confusion," end quote. Again, can the Premier tell British Columbians why there are conflicting comments and total confusion coming from him and his government?
Solicitor General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. There are no conflicting comments coming from the Solicitor General or the Premier or from this government. What has been made clear right from the very beginning, that there are health orders that need to be in place to deal with the spread of the virus. And that means limiting travel between health authorities as one of the most effective ways to do that. That's what has been announced. What was also made clear.
Members.
What is also.
Second. Members. Question was asked. Let's listen to the answer.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And I think that illustration of not wanting to hear the answer just confirms, in fact, what took place on Monday when the opposition went out right away on Twitter to say, oh, the government intends to prevent people from being able to go to work. Nothing could be further from the truth. They're not really interested. They're clearly not really interested in wanting to try and control a pandemic when they make statements like that. We have made it clear that, one, they will be being briefed tomorrow. Two, and that will be before the order goes out. But most importantly, that there is a need to be able to control transmission. And that means recognizing that travel restrictions have to be put in place. We have also made it clear that essential travel will still take place. And that list will also be coming out on Friday. But use some common sense on the other side of the House. That does not mean preventing people from being able to go to work. That does not mean preventing people from going and getting groceries, for example. What it means is asking people to do what we are already telling them to do, asking them to do, which is to stay in their own health authority, stay local. That's what the travel restrictions are about. The details will be announced on Friday. The Premier on Monday, as myself, have foreshadowed what is to come. And it's been made clear that that's what's taking place, and it's unfortunate that the opposition is choosing to play politics on such a serious...
Thank you, Mr. Member for Peace River South.
Well, thank you. I mean, the messaging coming from this minister and the premier and this government is about clear as mud. I mean, there is endless flip-flopping that's taking place from the premier on travel restrictions. First, he said he needed legal advice. Then he said he couldn't do it. Then he let skiers travel here from all across the continent to go skiing. And then 2 weeks ago, he shrugged and said, well, what are we going to do? Quote, arrest them? End quote. Now the flip-flopping premier is at it again, announcing essential travel only with police-enforced travel bans, with no details, but worse, he caught the police completely off guard and they knew nothing about this. It's no wonder every time the premier opens up his mouth, everybody in the province gets confused with his comments. So can the premier define easily today, what does he mean by essential travel?
Solicitor General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Well, I must admit, the only flip-flopping is coming from that side of the House. Clearly they decided they're not really interested in working with this side of the House or the House together in terms of dealing with the pandemic. That's what they're... And I can inform... Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And I can also inform the member that he is factually wrong on one of his statements in his question, and that is we have been working very closely with police in terms of how an order on travel between health authorities could be enforced. And that work has been ongoing. And like I said, you're being briefed tomorrow. And you knew you're being briefed tomorrow, so it's unfortunate, but I guess it's to their advantage in a way to say, oh, well, we don't know any details, so we'll go in there and play politics, as opposed to waiting till a scheduled briefing they're supposed to be getting tomorrow. That says everything you need to know about that side of the House.
Okay, one question at a time. Member for Peace River South.
Well, thank you, Speaker. The confusion starts because of the flip-flopping that's taking place on that side of the House. The confusion starts every time the Premier opens up his mouth. We asked for a briefing and explanation starting Monday, and instead they wait till a few minutes before question period today. Don't worry, we'll brief you tomorrow as we're making the public announcements to the province. Here's the confusion the government's causing. Last Friday, the Minister of Health claimed that there would be no travel restrictions in British Columbia. And then on Monday, the Premier announced full travel ban, complete with police checkpoints. He said, and I quote, "These will be conducted through random audits, not unlike any roadside checks," end quote. And ever since then, this Solicitor General has been trying to clean up the Premier's mess with different messaging yet again, adding more confusion for the people of British Columbia who are trying to understand the direction this province is trying to go. So can the Premier let the people of BC know who is right? Is it the Minister of Health? Is it the Solicitor General? Or is it the Premier? Who should they be listening to?
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. As the members on that side of the House well know, the pandemic creates a very fluid situation. We respond to the needs that happen as that pandemic is evolving and that pandemic is changing. We listen to the advice of the provincial health officer. it has become clear that what needs to be in place are travel restrictions. We have indicated that that is what is going to take place. That work on how that will happen has been underway. It has involved police agencies, for example, on how something could take place. What tools are required? It's involved working with BC Ferries, for example. Again, that work has been taking place. And I want to again correct the member across the way. They were informed yesterday, not a few minutes before question period today, that you would be getting briefed. And we will brief you when when there's information in place. So
members,
you were told yesterday, and your opposition leader asked me. She said, I've written you a letter and I want to have a briefing. And I said, we are setting one up for you. And your critic was also informed. So once again, Honourable Speaker,
waving a paper doesn't change it.
member for Saanich North and Islands.
Okay.
Members, that part of the question and answer is over, please. Let's continue with the next question. Member for Saanich North and Islands.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, the Premier promised during the recent SNAP election to implement all the Old Growth Review Panel's recommendations, including immediate protections for at-risk old growth and a paradigm shift with fully funded transition plans for communities. As the Union of BC Indian Chiefs and conservation groups have made extremely clear, a shift away from old growth logging simply will not happen without adequate funding, including conservation financing and funding for Indigenous-led protected areas. Yet there is nothing in this budget. The Wilderness Committee called this lack of funding, quote, a recipe to increase division and conflict over old growth forests in this province. My question is to the Minister of Finance, who ultimately is responsible for what is and what is not in the budget. Where is the funding needed to support the promises made to protect old growth and support communities through a shift in our forestry sector?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for the question. Our government is committed and dedicated to implementing the recommendations of the independent panel on old growth. And you will see in the budget that we have increased forestry's budget by $44 million this year over the previous budget. And again, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that the work, this important work, has already begun, and the important work of engaging with all interested parties is absolutely critical. We want to have a solution that works for everybody, and making sure that we engage with Indigenous governments across the regions are absolutely critical to making sure that we can do this important work.
Member for Saanich North and Islands on supplemental.
Minister of Finance, when pressed by the media on how they would fund enhanced old growth protection, said it would come from within Flynn Rowe's budget. This morning, the Finance Minister on CBC said the forestry budget was increased, just not highlighted. But the Finance Minister knows that the Flynn Rowe's budget is actually decreasing. $41 million this year, $30 million next year. As Andrea Innes from the Ancient Forest Alliance said, quote, despite promising a complete paradigm shift in the way BC forests are managed, the NDP government's 2021 budget is bereft of meaningful solutions to make it happen, end quote. This budget confirms what many have been worried about, that the BC NDP's promises to do things differently on land use, on forestry, and on old growth protection are just empty words. My question is actually Andrea's question from their press release yesterday, again to the Minister of Finance, who's responsible for these decisions. Quote, how does the province expect to protect ancient forest ecosystems, support communities, and overhaul its forest management regime with less funding than it had before, end quote.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, again, I want to point out, just how important that work is, and that the work has already begun. The Forest Minister is diligently engaging with all interested parties, and that we have increased forestry budget by $44 million this year over last year. It is in the budget. And I also want to point out that we did provide, and perhaps this might be helpful to the discussion, is that we did provide emergency funding going for an additional $85 million last year in the midst of the pandemic, because it was a pandemic. And I do want to point out that we do have a significant pandemic and recovery contingency should we need to continue to support the forestry sector as part of the pandemic and as part of our recovery.
Member for Kelowna Mission.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Well, the Premier has flipped, flopped, and bungled when it comes to travel restrictions for BC. The Solicitor General, the Health Minister, and the Public Health Officer have all provided advice to the public that directly contradicts him. But the Premier just keeps blowing it. People are wondering, can we go to work? Can we visit ailing parents? What if I have a medical appointment? How are people expected to provide evidence that their travel is essential? Will people have to produce sensitive personal information at these check stops?
Government House Leader.
No.
Member for Kelowna Mission Supplemental.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Well, that's the first straight answer we've received. So this is what the Premier said on Monday, and I quote, "Everybody who goes by will be asked where they're going and where they came from," end quote. The words of the Premier. But according to the BC Civil Liberties Association, they say, and I quote, "Police do not have the legal authority to ask questions like, where are you going? Where are you coming from? For what purpose?" End quote. Can the Premier explain what specific powers, then, the police will have to enforce this order at a checkpoint?
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. As been made clear on Monday, this is about restricting travel to deal with the pandemic and the spread of the virus, and in particular, what we've seen over the last while, which is the increase in variants in this province. Now, if the opposition is all of a sudden opposed to dealing with that, let the public of British Columbia know. If the opposition doesn't believe that the government should be doing everything it can to deal with this virus and the spread of this virus, and
members, the
British
chair would
Columbians
like to listen to the answer,
let
please.
the public know.
Member for Kamloops South Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, what the public is looking for, what British Columbians are looking for, is clarity and honesty. Not a bungling Premier and a blustering Solicitor General. This is what the Premier said on Monday, and I quote, "The Minister of Public Safety will be using the Emergency Program Act to restrict people's ability to move from one health authority to another. It will be done in a way that includes everyone, and there will be consequences if you are outside of your area on non-essential business," end quote. Now, Mr. Speaker, since the Premier winged it on Monday, our constituency offices have been flooded with calls from frustrated and confused constituents. British Columbians want to know what the Premier actually meant, but we don't know what to tell them. So the question is this: can the Premier explain why 4 days later he still can't explain what's happening with checkpoints and travel restrictions?
Solicitor General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And it'd be nice, if the opposition would be honest with its constituents when they call in, because the provincial health officer has already said travel advisories in place, which is stay in your own community. That if you have to ask about going somewhere else, don't do it. So, Honourable Speaker, if that's the kind of misinformation that they're giving their constituents when they phone their office, then I say shame on them. The order, the travel restrictions,
Members.
The travel restrictions that we have been talking about, that we have indicated need to be put in place. We've made clear those will be announced on Friday. What the Premier did appropriately was to foreshadow that we are having to take this step. We don't want, he would rather not have to take this step, but the virus and the variants are spreading through this province, and travel is one of the ways in which they are transmitted, and one of the most effective ways to deal with that is to bring in travel restrictions, and the provincial health officer has indicated that between health authorities is the most effective way to do that. That will ensure that in the Lower Mainland, you stay in the Lower Mainland. If you're in the interior and Northern Health, that's where you need to stay. It is not about, and it has been clear.
Members, let's listen to the answer.
And it has been clear, it is not going to impact on essential travel, such as medical appointments and going to work or commuting, between Burnaby and Vancouver. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, Honourable Speaker. It is unfortunate, Honourable Speaker, that once again they're not interested in working together. They're more interested in playing politics.
Member for Kamloops South Thompson on supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would say the definition of playing politics is calling an election in the middle of a pandemic. And that's on all of you. And I would also say to the Solicitor General, I know it must be frustrating that the Premier's press conference these days can basically be summed up as show up and screw up. He shows up and then he puts stuff out there and leaves it to the Solicitor General to come in behind and clean up the Premier's mess. I understand that that must be frustrating. But it's also frustrating for British Columbians to have no idea what the Premier meant when he said, again, and I quote, "The Minister of Public Safety will be using the Emergency Program Act to restrict people's ability to move from one health authority to another," end quote. That's the Premier's quote. That's not something that we said, and we also know that that's not something that the Solicitor General said. Mr. Speaker, does the Premier think it's essential for people to get to their jobs that cross a boundary that he's drawn? Does the Premier think it's essential for people to take care of their frail elderly parents in another health authority? The Premier can't define essential. He can't explain the consequences. And he can't explain why there's one set of rules in the Lower Mainland and apparently another set of rules in other parts of British Columbia. So again, the question to the Premier is this: will the Premier tell British Columbians more about these checkpoints that they can expect and what they can and can't do when it comes to travel within British Columbia?
Solicitor General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I'll resist the temptation to say, if you want to talk about screw-ups, let's just consider the former member's record when it came to... The Premier and the health officer have been very clear. People need to stay local. They need to stay in their own community. And at the same time, right from the get-go with this pandemic, there has been put in place what is essential. What is essential travel, and there's a long and exhaustive list. And so, Honourable Speaker, that is still in place. That has not changed, and it's not going to change, Honourable Speaker. And so I wish, Honourable Speaker, the opposition would just stop this fear-mongering and get on with the fact that we are working as hard as we can to keep British Columbians safe. That is the job of this side of the House, and we will continue to do that.
Okay. Member for Abbotsford South.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. In spite of what we've just heard in this House a few minutes ago, the police are not pleased with the Premier's bungling and lack of consultation. These officers are in the middle of fighting a deadly and escalating gang war, but what does this Premier do? He tells the police to divert their focus from fighting crime to fighting campers. This is what the National Police Federation says, and I quote, participating in enforcement roadblocks puts even greater pressure on limited resources, end quote. To the Premier, how many police resources will be diverted away from stopping this dangerous gang war in the Lower Mainland?
Solicitor General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. None.
Member for Abbotsford
So
South.
the Premier
on
was
supplemental.
mistaken then. This Premier has no idea what he's doing. Just yesterday, there was a targeted shooting on the front steps of an ice rink in Langley, right next to families and children who are using the play area inside. To make matters worse, most of the officers enforcing the Premier's checkpoints have not been vaccinated yet. The New Westminster Police Officers Association says, and I quote, "We would certainly ask that the government make us a priority for vaccination before they start asking us to enforcing their public health orders," end quote. Question to the Premier. How many unvaccinated police officers will be put at risk on the front lines of the Premier's checkpoints?
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And if any question wanted to show that this opposition is not even interested in the facts or working with people, it is that kind of approach that we are just seeing right now. Honourable Speaker, we have been working with police in terms of how travel restrictions could be put in place, what would be the most effective way to ensure that they work. We have been engaged with ferries to ensure how that would work at terminals, for example. We have been engaged with the tourism industry in terms of dealing with bookings and how that would work, Honourable Speaker. We have been working with the people who actually know what needs to happen and what needs to take place. What the Premier has said is that there will be travel restrictions coming and that we need to have them. And we need to have them to control the virus. And we need to have them to help keep British Columbians safe. That's what we are doing. That's what we're going to continue to do. They will be being briefed tomorrow, and there will be further announcements on what exactly will be taking place tomorrow.
Member for Surrey South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the Premier surprised the province with his police checkpoints, people are worried that Black, Indigenous, and people of colour will be racially profiled. The head of the BC Civil Liberties Association, Harsha Walia, has raised concerns. Quote, "The concern is that BIPOC people will face more questioning, more interrogation, have to produce more proof, and will be more likely to face fines in this process," end quote. And that's the problem. Absolutely no one knows what the Premier was thinking, including the Solicitor General and the Minister of Health. So that leaves everybody wondering which BIPOC organizations were consulted on this measure and which ones signed off on the Premier's checkpoints. These groups want to know who's been consulted. Will the Premier answer their very legitimate questions?
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I thank the member for the question, and I understand very much the concerns of the BIPOC community. And as a matter of fact, after question period, I will be meeting with a number of groups and organizations in terms of hearing from them on the issues around the implementation of travel restrictions.
Member for Shuswap.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. It appears that no one in government understands what the Premier meant to say, including him. The Solicitor General had to try and walk back his comments. Both Dr. Bonnie Henry and the Health Minister have given different advice. And the police have no idea what the Premier is talking about. Now we have the Vancouver police objecting to enforcing the checkpoints they've been told they will be running. Quote, "The VPD is not conducting random checks for compliance with travel restrictions. We have not seen specific details of these pending restrictions." End quote. And British Columbians who want to do the right thing are confused. It is the Premier who has created this mass confusion. Will the Premier stand up and apologize to British Columbians for creating this unnecessary stress and anxiety?
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I think it's that opposition that needs to stand up and apologize. I think it's that opposition that needs to stand up and apologize to British Columbians for some of the most fear-mongering questions that we have seen. What has been made clear right from the beginning that this is about ensuring the safety of British Columbians by limiting the spread of the virus. It is not about checkpoints in downtown Vancouver. Nobody has told the VPD that they will be doing checkpoints at any point, and to suggest that they have is simply wrong. What has also been clear, this opposition knows full well that they were going to be briefed tomorrow. They were told yesterday that they were going to be briefed. The bottom line is this: you most certainly were. Your leader said to me, "I've written you a letter." I said, "What's it about?" "I want a briefing," she said. I said, "Don't worry, it's in the works. You're going to be briefed." My office contacted your critic. You were told yesterday you
To the chair.
briefed, and you are.
Orders. Order, members.
This is about public safety. This is about keeping British Columbians healthy and safe and stopping the virus. They may not want to do that. We will, and we are going to do it right.
The bell ends the question period. Member for Saanich Northern Ireland seeking leave to present a petition. Is leave granted? Please proceed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've got a petition of 180 signatures, I believe, with respect to a situation on Salt Spring Island on Bettis Road. Residents of the neighborhood are requesting the Ministry of Transportation to address a long-standing issue with respect to the road and road ownership. This has been going on for a long period of time, and this is the neighborhood asking Modi to step in and assist the neighborhood. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, I have the honour to table a report pursuant to the COVID-19 Related Measures Act. Madam Clerk.
Orders of the day.
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I call continue budget debate.
Member for Langley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's an honor to stand up and rise in this House and continue my speech on the debate on the budget. And I left off by speaking about the previous Liberal approach to budgeting, which was to sell the furniture, pretend you have a balanced budget, and to make sure above and beyond all else that you address the issues that are primarily of concern to your friends and not the people of British Columbia. And that's an approach that led us to land fire sales, that led the government to reaching into the pockets of British Columbians and working British Columbians and families with things like MSP fee increases. And, you know, we've heard throughout this budget debate so far from the members of the opposition, from, I call them the Wild West Coalition, Mr. Speaker, but from the members of the Wild West Coalition and the opposition, we've heard from them so far in this debate, in question period, and in this House, that they are more concerned with the fact that they lost an election than they are with delivering services to British Columbians in a pandemic. This is a good budget, Mr. Speaker. This is a pandemic budget, and it is a breath of fresh air compared to what we've seen in the past. And I'd like to take a little walk down memory lane, Mr. Speaker. And I know for our friends in the opposition, they've done a lot of things that they don't really want to remember or talk about, but I think it's important that we remember the history of how we got to here. And I want to talk about the budget of 2009. And that's the budget that Gordon Campbell's finance minister, Colin Hanson, introduced right before an election in the middle of an economic crisis that said there was going to be a $495 million deficit. Well, fast forward a few weeks later, after the election, and the deficit was actually 3.5 times greater than that, Mr. Speaker. It was $1.8 billion. So I can understand the disbelief coming from the other side of the House that here's a government that went through an election in the middle of a crisis and came through with a budget deficit that's actually significantly less than forecast. So it's not a surprise they want to know how it was done. It's not a surprise that they're asking to see a jobs plan so they can see how we're going to create all these jobs. What is somewhat surprising, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned previously, is the outrage from the member for Peace River South on the fact that we're creating so many jobs. This is a budget that's going to serve the interests of British Columbians, and it is a credit to the Minister of Finance and her team, to the Deputy Minister of Finance, to the staff at Treasury Board, and to everyone that has done the hard work to make this budget happen, because it hasn't happened in isolation, Mr. Speaker. It has happened while this government has been creating a plethora of new programs to address issues that we'd never dreamed existed 12 months ago. The BC Recovery Benefit went from an idea to checks in people's hands and in their bank accounts in record time. And to do all of that while also preparing all of the necessary work for a budget like this that has come out this soundly is really a credit to their professionalism, to their talent, and to the civil service here in British Columbia, and to the oversight of the Minister of Finance. And I should add, Mr. Speaker, that it's not a surprise, because that's the approach that we've taken to governance in this province in the past 3.5 years. It's not a surprise that we're able to attract record-setting private sector investment like LNG Canada, the largest private sector investment in the history of Canada, right here in BC. And all of the jobs that that's creating all throughout the supply chain. And, that is a direct result of the work that we've done. Now, the opposition, the BC Liberals, they spent a lot of time, a lot of hot air talking about liquid natural gas. We got it done. We didn't just talk about it, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to, move now to the budget and to the issues that this budget addresses for the people of British Columbia. This is a pandemic budget, Mr. Speaker, and at its core, at the center of it, is public health and the healthcare system. We are in the final push of COVID-19, Mr. Speaker. We cannot let up. We need to listen to the restrictions, listen to our public health officers, the Minister of Health, and make sure that we're doing everything we can to bend the curve, to break the circuit, and to get this virus under control while we roll out the largest vaccination program in BC history and Canadian history, with the work and partnership of so many. And I am, so thrilled to have heard yesterday that Fraser Health is rolling out vaccination for all school-based employees in K-12 and School District 35 in Langley, here in mine and my colleague, the member from Langley East, our constituencies in the school district. And, that's just a credit to how well the vaccination program is going, and how well that the nurses, the civil service, all of the healthcare workers that are behind that program, public health, how well they're doing in getting that done, and making sure that we're getting as many shots in people's arms as we can, as fast as we can, because ultimately that is going to be what helps get us through to the other side. And we're doing this, Mr. Speaker. And while we're doing this, we're putting 1,400 people previously working in tourism and hospitality who have lost their jobs because of this crisis. Because first and foremost, this is an economic crisis, but first and foremost, this is a public health crisis, who have lost their jobs because of this crisis. We are putting them to work during the rollout through these community partnerships and partnerships with businesses and the industry. And that is it's phenomenal. It's not something this province has ever seen before, and it is a hallmark of our government's approach. Managing the public health crisis, Mr. Speaker, is the key to resolving the economic crisis. So before we can talk about supports to businesses, and we're supporting businesses in more ways than any other region in North America right now. But before we can even talk about that, we need to talk about what we're doing to get the public health crisis under control. It is easy to come up with manufactured outrage over public health orders that are sensible and reasonable and react to the situation as it involves. It is easy to stand up and to yell and scream about those kinds of things. But what we need to do is have cool heads to make sure that we're setting a good example for the public, and to make sure that we get beyond this crisis so that we can start focusing on what comes next. Budget 2021, Mr. Speaker, includes $900 million for our ongoing COVID-19 response. That's the vaccination program, making sure that everyone who wants a vaccine will be able to get a vaccine. That goes to fund all of the contact tracers and all of the testing that we've been doing, which has just been phenomenal. You know, the Kwantlen Polytechnic University parking lot and the Langley Events Center in Langley and Langley East have been turned into mass testing centers. It's just totally remarkable. And it also includes increased capacity for the BC Centre for Disease Control, the BC CDC, because if this has taught us anything, it's that we need to build capacity in organizations like the BC CDC so that we're ready when situations like this occur. And it also includes supports, that $900 million also includes ongoing supports for increasing safety for our seniors in long-term care, for making sure that there's screening, additional personal protective equipment, and all types of measures, Mr. Speaker. And that's not to mention the $585 million put aside for the Healthcare Access Program, a program that I'm proud to be a part of in my mandate from the Premier as the Parliamentary Secretary for Skills Training, but a program that is helping folks become healthcare workers and healthcare assistants, including in long-term care. And we're doing this by targeting folks who have lost their jobs as a consequence of the pandemic. We are putting people back to work, Mr. Speaker, and we are putting them back to work in a way that is going to help improve the system and help paper over the cracks that we have seen emerge as a result of this pandemic. And, I can say something that my constituents are very happy about in this budget is the new Surrey Hospital, Mr. Speaker. That piece of land that the government has acquired, because we had to acquire a piece of land, of course, after the BC Liberals sold off the land set aside for a Surrey Hospital so they could pay for tax breaks for their friends. But that piece of land is 5 minutes away from Langley City Hall. It is going to serve the people of Langley and the people of Langley City, the people in Brookswood, and it is going to take pressure off of Langley Memorial Hospital. And that's just incredible. Now, this is such a contrast, Mr. Speaker, this approach to healthcare, of building hospitals, of investing in people, of creating training opportunities and coordinating the labor market, to maximize value for the community. This approach is so different than the approach that we saw in the BC Liberals' 16 years of bungling on this file. 16 bungled years, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal approach to healthcare was about ripping up collective agreements, ripping up contracts, and laying people off, outsourcing work. The BC Liberals, the last time they were in, laid off more women in a single day in healthcare than any government in the history of this country. That is the approach that the BC Liberals took to this file. That is the approach that the BC Liberals have taken to healthcare. We're investing in people. They did the opposite. This budget, in particular in terms of healthcare, is building on the work that we have already been doing in Langley. And I can't say how thrilled I am with the amount of times the Minister of Health, my friend, the Minister of Health, has come out to Langley and come out to Langley East. Because there have been so many funds for Langley Memorial Hospital, for the MRI suite, on issues that were ignored by the previous government. So, we were just the other day, my colleague, the member for Langley East, and I, announcing the substantial completion of the Langley Memorial Hospital upgrades. $29.3 million from the provincial government, combined with funding from the Langley Memorial Hospital Foundation and funding from the Langley Memorial Auxiliary, to substantially upgrade our emergency department, which is going to be open this coming May. And I can tell you, it is a credit to the professionalism of the folks at Fraser Health, of Jason Cook and his team, the Langley Memorial Hospital Foundation, Heather Scott, and all of the construction workers, that work continued throughout the pandemic. This is so needed for our growing community. And that's in addition to our new MRI suite, which is running 16 hours a day for 2 shifts. And that's an NDP investment. That's an NDP government investment in Langley, Mr. Speaker, which just wasn't a priority for the BC Liberals. But this isn't just a pandemic budget, Mr. Speaker. this is a recovery budget. This is an economic recovery budget. And there are $26 billion of capital investments in this budget. We are building more hospitals right now than I think any government in the history of British Columbia has ever done at one time. It's just phenomenal. We're upgrading hospitals all over the place. We're building new towers and we're building new hospitals. And that's needed because over 16 years, there was so little movement on the file and so much growth, as particularly in the Lower Mainland, so much growth that these projects are desperately needed right now. But that's not the only thing that's going on with the capital plan. Of course, we've got community benefit agreements so that a whole generation of young people can get skilled apprenticeship opportunities and complete their apprenticeships so that there is value added from our capital plan into the labor market. And you're just seeing those projects now really start to take off. The Patella Bridge, something that should have been done decades ago, is something that we're funding in this budget. The Broadway Corridor, increasing transit access in the busiest bus corridor in North America down Broadway, extending the SkyTrain down there. Cowichan Hospital, making sure that the people of the Cowichan Valley have access to a new hospital in the same way that Surrey is going to have. Desperately needed. The Massey Tunnel replacement. And I'd just like to say a word here, Mr. Speaker, which is that we've heard a lot of talk from the members of the Wild West Coalition about the Massey Tunnel replacement and how far along it could have been and how all the work was ready to go, et cetera. Well, I can tell you, I was talking to some pile drivers just this morning, about that project. And the reality of the test piling was that they were not able to find the type of foundation that they needed in the water to put a bridge on the engineering specs that they had. So the idea that that was a shovel-ready project ready to go is just frankly laughable and just not, in accordance with the reality of it. But most importantly, most importantly is the MLA for Langley and for my constituents in Langley, and as a Langley boy, SkyTrain to Langley is in this budget, Mr. Speaker. This has been something that has been floated since the late 90s, extending the SkyTrain down King George and all the way to Langley Centre. And we are going to make it happen, Mr. Speaker. We are going to make this a reality. And this is going to be a game changer for Langley. It is going to be a game changer for Langley City. It is going to be transformative. I had a great talk with Kwantlen Polytechnic University the other day about their Langley campus and their plans and the changes that are going to happen there as a consequence of SkyTrain, which are going to be so positive and so beneficial to the community. Right now, Langley City is passing its new official community plan, which is going to see a very intentional and coordinated approach to zoning, particularly around SkyTrain stations, to add density, but also focus on affordability and livability, Mr. Speaker, so that we don't just get this kind of urban sprawl that happens around SkyTrain stations, but that it actually happens in a very deliberate way that builds on the changes that are already occurring in Langley. So I am so proud to be part of a government that is funding that kind of investment. And I know our municipal partners are too. I know that the mayor of Langley City, Val Vandenbroek, and the mayor of Langley Township, Jack Froese, are going to have done so much work on the SkyTrain file in terms of pushing it ahead with the mayor's council. And they are I'm so proud of that work, and their communities are going to benefit. Our community is going to benefit so much from this investment. And that's an investment that, the BC Liberals and the Wild West Coalition just couldn't get done because, hearing from the other side and hearing the comments during this debate and in question period from the members from the opposition, it is very clear that the BC Liberals do not understand the communities south of the Fraser River. They didn't invest in them. And when they did, their solution was tolling roads, putting unfair mobility taxes on commuters south of the Fraser without other options and without other investment options or ways to move around. They told the Portman Bridge, they told the Golden Ears, which meant that if you were a single mom in Maple Ridge trying to cross the bridge to take your son to football, and I've talked to folks in that situation, you were just paying through the nose in tolls to pay for BC Liberal contracts. And that's not right. It's not an approach we agree with, and it's not an approach we're taking. And so I'm happy to say the new Patella Bridge is going to be toll-free. And the first thing that we did when we got into office, in addition to eliminating MSP, was eliminating tolls on those bridges. Now, Mr. Speaker, an issue that's near and dear to my heart, and I think, my life and going about my life in Langley and of so many people in my age demographic and younger, is childcare. Investments in childcare are absolutely critical. Langley is a growing community. Langley is a young community. And in order for young families, for women and men, for parents to participate in the labor market, to go to work every day, they need to know that they have a way for their children to be taken care of so that they can go out and do that and earn an income and support their family and create a better life for their kids. We are investing in that. And Budget 2021 builds on the work that we have already done in this sector. We have supported a $1 billion childcare plan, Mr. Speaker. And my friend, the Minister of State for Childcare, has done tremendous work on that, funding nearly 26,000 new spaces. We've reduced parent fees by up to $350 a month for almost 70,000 children and their families. And reduced fees, and that's through the Child Care Fee Reduction Initiative. And we've reduced fees by up to $1,250 a month through affordable child care benefit for low and middle income families. And in total, Mr. Speaker, over the last 4 years, in my constituency alone of Langley, we have spent $25 million either creating new spaces or putting money back into the pockets of families through childcare benefits and rebates and incentives, so that people can put their head on the pillow at night and rest assured that their children are taken care of during the day. And we are building on that work right now. And we'd also introduced, Mr. Speaker, a $2 an hour wage increase for early childhood educators for ECEs and licensed facilities to make that a more competitive place to work, stable employment, where the work that people are doing, taking care of our children and teaching our children. We're moving that from the Ministry of Children and Family Development to the Ministry of Education, because early childhood learning is so critical. And that's what child care is. It's not just a place to drop off your kids. It's a place for your child to go and grow and self-actualize and, become socially acculturated. We need to value that work. And so this budget, Mr. Speaker, invests in childcare. It invests in childcare by doubling the $10 a day program, by doubling the wage enhancement for ECEs, for early childhood educators, from $2 an hour to $4 an hour. We are giving early childhood educators a raise, Mr. Speaker. And that's not just good for childcare centers who are going to have an easier time attracting work, attracting ECEs and preventing turnover. It's good for those families that depend on those wages to go out and make their living and to support their own kids. So that's just, it's the right thing to do economically, and it's the right thing to do morally. And I am so proud to be part of a government that's doing that. And we also include here investment, 400 new Aboriginal Head Start spaces, Mr. Speaker, and thousands of new spaces through the Childcare BC New Spaces Fund. So in many ways, this is a budget focused on economic recovery and a capital plan that is going to create tons of jobs. But we're also creating more jobs in childcare and investing in childcare so that people can go and work in those jobs, so that we can allow for more, participation by women and by equity-seeking groups and by parents in the workforce. And that's very important, Mr. Speaker, because we have a skilled trade shortage in this province. By 2029, we're forecast to have 73,000 job openings in the skilled trades, 77% of which, 55,800 of which, are from retiring trade workers. We are working hard to make sure that people can access skills training and complete their apprenticeships. And, childcare is a part of that, but making sure that there's apprenticeship opportunities and funding is a part of that as well. We're building a future workforce by advancing technology and trades training, investing in Indigenous skills training development, supporting programs that encourage women in the building trades, partnering with colleges and other levels of government to ensure 21st century training facilities and tools to support our students. And those are students that attend university colleges and teaching universities like Kwantlen Polytechnic in my riding, who are studying to become millwrights, industrial mechanics, studying carpentry and all kinds of trades programs. Or students at the University of the Fraser Valley Trades and Technology Campus, a university that has an amazing team, an amazing president, Joanne McLean. I used to sit on the board there, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell you the leadership there is very strong. And there you've got students there studying electrical trades, joinery, plumbing, and all types of programs. And the investments we're making in skills training are going to benefit apprentices like my friend Chelsea French, who's studying to become a commercial transportation mechanic. And this is what employers want to see in our economy, Mr. Speaker. They want to see investment in skills training. When you get large companies that are looking to invest, and I know we've heard from the member for Peace River South that he doesn't want to invest in British Columbia. He said during his response to the budget that he would look elsewhere to put his money. And, I don't think that's a confidence-building thing to say about the province of British Columbia. I know that LNG Canada looked at BC and the consortium of companies involved in that and said, hey, this is somewhere we want to invest. And it's because we invest in our people. They look to whether or not we have a workforce that is capable of doing the work, and that's our comparative advantage in an economy based on global investment. In this budget, in 2021, in the 2021 budget, we're going to continue building on that with $96 million over 3 years for new training spaces to build out the health workforce, for instance. We've got $32 million in one-time funding for continued training initiated by the Stronger BC Restart Plan, and $17 million for partnering with Indigenous communities and organizations to expand access to programs through Indigenous skills training programs. And, we've also got, because we've got a changing economy and we need to have a resilient workforce, Mr. Speaker, we've got $5 million set aside to expand micro-credentialing to allow training to help workers looking to retrain. And I was fortunate, Mr. Speaker, to be able to do an announcement with my friend, the Minister for Energy, Mines, and Low Carbon Innovation on micro-credentialing programs for auto techs looking to upgrade so that they could, work on electric vehicles. Because, as we've heard from the Minister of Climate Change, from the Environment and Climate Change Strategy today, we are becoming a world leader in electric vehicle sales. Well, we need mechanics that know how to deal with those kinds of vehicles. And I was heartened to see Scott Waddle from Precision Auto, an automotive mechanic, automotive technician, and my friend, the member for Langley East constituency in Aldergrove, who is carving out a business exclusively focusing on electric vehicles. And he's doing that, Mr. Speaker, so that he can have a business that he can leave to his son. And realizing that the world is changing, that he needs to get ahead of it. And he's, as a Red Seal automotive tech, he's benefiting from that retraining. And it's just an example of how the entrepreneurial spirit can thrive if we support it. So, Mr. Speaker, there's so much more I'd like to say about the budget. And obviously, there's only so much time I can take. But to conclude, I would like to say that, I strongly support this budget. I think it is a breath of fresh air over the land fire sales and what I would characterize as highway robbery that happened in the past in the 16 years of Liberal bungling when the Wild West Coalition was in power. And I think that this is exactly what BC needs at this time. And I think that's why the voters told us that in October. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member. Recognizing Caribou.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's indeed a pleasure to be here to represent the riding of Caribou-Chilcotin and, of course, our constituents. I did want to just clarify one thing right off the bat. As much as I appreciate the previous member's comments, I certainly wanted to clarify that the BC Liberals for certain have the interests of all British Columbians in mind. And I did also pick up on one other thing that seemed a little confusing to me, because I think the previous member referred to record timing of delivery of the BC Recovery Benefit. I can assure you that constituents in my riding are still waiting for that $500 benefit that was promised by Christmas time, and certainly the small business recovery has not come off exactly flawless. So thank you for those comments, Mr. Speaker. I want to start by saying I'm not surprised, but I can't help but be somewhat disappointed by the budget speech that we all heard this week. Honestly, I feel a little bit frustrated. I think that every taxpayer in this province was hoping for greater things. I know personally I was shocked to see the plan of our debt rising by $39.5 billion to a staggering $127 billion by the plan's end. I'm shocked by the debt. I'm not as shocked by the debt, rather, as much as I am shocked at what we will receive in exchange for this debt. As critic for rural development in this province, I must say I'm shocked at the disconnect that this government has with rural BC. While there are numbers of projects planned throughout the province, none appear to be the size of what the people in rural parts of this province were hoping for. We heard in the budget promises for funding models that I sincerely hope will work this time and that will work unlike the last failed attempts before we see success in getting dollars where they are needed to be most in this province. Mr. Speaker, I was disappointed to hear the word rural only one time in the speech. There were other words that were not mentioned often, words like forestry and mining. A small oversight, I'm sure. This has been dubbed a big spending budget, but certainly from my perspective, it doesn't look that way in my riding. There are certainly things that were hoped for, and certainly hundreds of millions of dollars that could have helped rural BC and the Caribou-Chilcotin. On a number of occasions, I've spoke to this House with respect to flooding in my riding. I spoke at length about areas like Dog Creek, Frizzy Road, Canham Lake, and other areas. Mr. Speaker, I've referred to specific people like the Kutnicks, Betty McLennan, the Bednars, and others that are paying the price for this government's inaction. Mr. Speaker, when I refer to Dog Creek, in case you haven't heard it before, there's a culvert there that was placed decades ago and is flowing water from this culvert that is causing so much damage to taxpayers that it is absolutely astonishing. Mr. Speaker, I will continue to try and have these issues heard, as will, I'm certain, my colleagues who are suffering similar issues. It's not just that this damage continues to happen that is so frustrating, but that it continues to cost the taxpayers of this province so much in repairs, and it never solves the actual problem. It might surprise you to know that we have repaved multiple times Dog Creek Road and Highway 20 in the last year alone. The cost over the years would have to be absolutely mind-blowing, and rather than just fixing the problem. Last year, the province helped Williams Lake in another moment of need with respect to flooding and damage caused by a massive landslide in the River Valley system. This slide caused severe damage to infrastructure and the environment. I think that the contribution was around $10 million, and trust me, we were grateful for that help. I will always give credit where credit is due. But at the time, experts warned that more slides in this area were imminent and that there was a need for more help, but after applications by the City of Williams Lake were denied, those predicted slides actually did occur. As a matter of fact, they happened 2 weeks ago. Much of the recent damage has been ignored, and it's just been left at the base of this cliff. I never heard about any funding for this major project that will likely cause severe losses to businesses and to personal property. And Mr. Speaker, trust me, I listened very closely and pored over the books presented as well, and there was nothing. Mr. Speaker, this isn't unique to the Caribou-Chilcotin. This is happening all over rural BC. While more severe throughout the Caribou, there is broken and ignored road all over this province. It's pleasing to me to see that 10 Mile Slide area has been slated finally for repair as well, but much work is needed for the balance of rural BC. It's not just culverts that have got my focused attention, Mr. Speaker. The roads of our riding in the Caribou-Chilcotin are absolutely appalling. Again, this isn't unique to my riding, and I'm not sure how to even paint a clear picture of how bad the roads are, but I'll try. Last week, I had to alert the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure that we had a school bus stuck on a paved road at a place in my riding called Frost Creek. When a constituent has exhausted all avenues by reaching out to offices and can't get an answer or action, that, Mr. Speaker, is generally when we hear from these individuals. One such constituent has reached out to me expressing his concern that he feels could cause a serious accident. And I have to say, I don't disagree. The situation here is another culvert that has not received service. And what has happened in this case is rather than the culvert break free from the pressure of a lake that is built up behind it, it's the earth and rock under the culvert that is actually let go. Of course, what that's done is remove all of the support for the culvert in question. This culvert is at the base of a hill on a highway that often has logging trucks and other heavy trucks like fuel, cattle, hay, etc. And of course, this constituent worries, and rightly so, that a heavy load going over this culvert could cause it to collapse. As serious as this is, it's one of so many serious problems. I listened and scoured the budget books, but I can't see any major projects for the riding I represent of Caribou-Chilcotin with respect to roads and or slide areas, even though we have spoken at length on this subject. Mr. Speaker, trust me when I say that we need these projects. We need major help with some of these problems. We have areas that we are using what Modi would describe as rig mats on some of our roads. Mr. Speaker, in case you don't know, these are rubber mats that are laid across broken road to help vehicles navigate over the damaged area, and in other roads are simply impassable. As we speak, Mr. Speaker, it appears to me that in this budget, the capital expenditures are actually going down in this ministry from $5.3 billion to $3.5 billion. And out of the major projects, while we completed some of them in 2020 and will start a handful of projects this year, there are very few projects in rural BC. I am pleased to see that West Fraser Road is finally on the list, which has been a nightmare for the residents there. After local politicians and different governments met last week to discuss rising levels of water in our creeks and have issued warnings for swift water and potential flood conditions, I know, Mr. Speaker, at this point I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it's almost unbelievable what the residents of the Caribou-Chilcotin have had to endure since 2017. As a result of the most serious fires our province has seen in 2017 and 18, it has truly changed our landscape. And it's changed it in a way that will not be repaired for decades. And the change has brought very serious issues. Those issues are flooding. From Sheridan Lake and Bridge Creek in the south to Borland and Valley Creeks to the San Jose River, which, by the way, now looks more like a lake at points along its path into Williams Lake, and of course west to the Chilcotin. Mr. Speaker, there are not enough trees in the area to absorb all of the water. They are all flooding as we are present here, Mr. Speaker, and I heard nothing significant in the budget speech for Caribou-Chilcotin with respect to this. Even though we've reached out to ministries and ministers, even though our local governments have applied for funding, Mr. Speaker, in some cases, our local governments have simply acknowledged that some of these projects are simply beyond their ability to repair, beyond their financial ability. At the taxpayers' level, when they suffer damage to their own property due to things well beyond their control, they are often referred to the DFA, which is the Disaster Financial Assistance Funding Application, which, with all due respect, it doesn't in most cases work. And even when the stars align perfectly for one of these applications, the funding often doesn't come through. This is federally funded money administered by the province which has to be related to a declaration of disaster made by a local government, linked to a weather event in a location of the incident. I can't imagine what could go wrong with that process. I hope you understand that the program has multiple levels of complexity that in the end serve very few people. As I said before, Mr. Speaker, I will give credit where it's due. I am also happy to see the announced upgrade to Caribou Memorial Hospital, which of course serves our entire region. This project was announced by our government years ago, and I'm happy to see it finally come to fruition. We will see an investment of more than $200 million into this facility. I'm thankful that the project will start this year, and I look forward to lobbying for a local workforce to be the recipients of millions of dollars of wages and income for local businesses. I want, Mr. Speaker, to be sure that these funds get every opportunity to flow through our community rather than seeing big labour forces coming from outside of the area to complete the work that our very skilled residents are completely capable of completing at far less cost than having workforces be compensated for living out expenses along with travel expenses and delays of lost time due to that travel. We have a very abundant supply of capable contractors and workers that can for sure complete much of the work on a project like this at a great savings to our province. But make no mistake about it, we are all very excited about this overdue project. Mr. Speaker, loss of timber supply has also been an effect of the multiple fires, which will result and has resulted in not only the start of losses in our economy and our jobs market, but will also translate to the loss of revenue for this province. I had also hoped to hear something more significant with respect to our forestry industry. Don't get me wrong, Mr. Speaker, I was happy to hear about the planting of 300 million trees, but this is an economy that benefits the entire province, and particularly rural BC. And while the budget remains pretty much flat, approximately a 5% increase in spending, it's clear to me that this government does not see this industry as an investment. Economically, I can't imagine that in this province, other than the effect that COVID is playing on our economy, that there is a more important and concerning industry. The pressure this industry has experienced over the past half-decade is alarming. It's not just the loss of cuts, but loss of forests also. These losses are not just from fires, Mr. Speaker, but also from the ravaging effects of mountain pine beetle and also spruce beetle. To add to this, of course, there have been very volatile pressure of world lumber markets, which of course at this point are very strong, but that, Mr. Speaker, was not the case a year or so ago. It has been a struggle, and we rely very much so for the economy that this industry provides in our communities. Mr. Speaker, I've heard about the loss of tenure for forestry companies over the past weeks, and I've heard about reductions in tenures and cuts for these companies, so important to the well-being of our residents and our communities. Mr. Speaker, as critic for rural development, I had hoped for more, and believe me, the residents had hoped for very much more in this budget for Caribou-Chilcotin, particularly with respect to such an important industry. The budget had suggestions of added connectivity throughout the province. Mr. Speaker, our government referred to hundreds of added kilometres of connectivity in last week's throne speech. I can't even begin to suggest how little of an impact that could have on a riding, and for that matter, for rural BC. I have concerns with respect to my role as critic for rural development as well. Mr. Speaker, there has only been $40 million dedicated to this very important and much-needed project. It will affect all of rural BC, but that amount has also been spread out over 4 years. Connectivity in recent meetings of our Rural Committee has been identified as our #1 issue. It trumps all other issues, Mr. Speaker, but this does not seem to be a priority in any way to this government. I will be very interested to understand what hundreds of kilometres actually means, because in my riding, it's very close to 500 kilometres from Decca Lake to Anaheim Lake. That, Mr. Speaker, is only from the southeast corner to the northwest corner. I would say that hundreds of kilometres, that is hundreds of kilometres that needs to be serviced. My riding, Mr. Speaker, is massive, but when you look at the rest of the province, we need to be talking about improving connectivity to thousands of kilometres of roads, if not tens of thousands. Honestly, Mr. Speaker, it's not enough to do hundreds of kilometres. Not only is this connectivity important for those businesses that are trying to conduct commerce from rural locations for their home-based businesses, their ranches, tourism operations, but this connectivity has a need for improvements in some of our larger communities like 100 Mile House, which has actually had businesses struggle with this connectivity issue for years. Right downtown, Mr. Speaker. This community is anything but remote, but they have had big struggles when it comes to connectivity. Also for independent learning, This is learning that would be similar to our distance education program. I heard nothing about this, and this is a budget item that has actually received cuts to it in 2020. If you can imagine, Mr. Speaker, during a time of COVID, but because of the vastness of my riding, there are a great many people that have relied on independent education programs. This is not something new in my riding, or for that matter in rural BC, but the need has never been greater than during these trying times. As well, Mr. Speaker, this is of great importance to our emergency workers in the region, and of course, once again, throughout rural British Columbia. Currently, our emergency responders must rely on ham radios and satellite phones to communicate in the Chilcotin and other remote areas. When I say, Mr. Speaker, I'm somewhat tongue-in-cheek because this isn't really remote. It's 15 minutes or so west of Williams Lake, which is a major area in our riding. Mr. Speaker, noting the hour, I would move for adjournment and would ask to reserve my spot after lunch.
Ask you to move the adjournment of the debate.
Mr. Speaker, I move adjournment of the debate and would ask to reserve my spot after lunch.
Members, a vote is about to occur. Please have your cards ready. All those in favor of the motion to adjourn the debate, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Carried.
Members, you heard the motion. It's adjournment of the debate. Is it taken care of? Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I move that we adjourn the House.
Members, you heard the motion. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose indicate nay. Motion carried. This House stands adjourned until 1:30 this afternoon.